Welcome to Motherhood. Whether you're 18 or 80, Dr. Christina Hibbert, clinical psychologist, author, and mother of 6, is here to help you through the ups and downs, the joys and frustrations, the new information from experts, and the stories of happiness and heartbreak from real moms. Remember, if you can, tell your mama to listen too.
And I'll make everything all right.
Here's Christy.
Welcome to Motherhood. I'm Dr. Christina Hibbert, here to help you overcome, become, and flourish through this incredible experience we call motherhood. Today we're going to be talking about an important topic, something I think we all can use a little more help with. We're all going to have to deal with this at some point or another. If we haven't already, probably we have a bunch of times already. And hopefully we can learn some skills today from our expert guest on how to do this a little bit better. And what we're talking about today is forgiveness. And isn't it such an important topic, especially for we moms and parents? We are going to have to forgive our children, I'm sure. We're going to have to forgive others. We're going to have to forgive our parents and our in-laws probably a bunch of times. And also to forgive ourselves. And hopefully by the end of today's show, you'll leave with a better understanding of what forgiveness really looks like and how we can really forgive easier and more effectively, and what are the skills that we need to forgive. Because I think sometimes we know we need to forgive, but it's hard. It's hard to let go. It's hard to feel like, well, if I forgive and forget, quote unquote, then does that mean that I'm opening myself up to future hurt or pain or, and hopefully today we'll see that no, it means that we're letting go of a lot of hurt and pain. And we can do that while also keeping ourselves safe and protected as well. So before we get into that, and before I introduce our fabulous guest, I want to thank you for joining us here on Motherhood, as I do each week, and to be part of our community here as we learn how to grow through motherhood instead of just going through it. And hopefully you're doing that with us on our Facebook group, Growing Through Motherhood. So join us there, as well as on social media, on Instagram and Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, of course, where you can find videos of all the episodes, including today's, and our new website, motherhoodtv.com, where you can also find all the videos together in one place, very conveniently. I also hope that you visit my website, drchristinahibbert.com, for more on today's topic and other things that we talk about, as well as a lot of great free resources and links to my books and other resources that you might want to check out. Now, before we get into introducing our guest, I just wanted to share a couple thoughts on forgiveness. I've had obviously I've had personal experience with forgiveness. I think we all have. We've all had to do that. There have been some bigger things that have been harder to forgive and some smaller things that feel hard to forgive in the moment. But I do believe what the wise people say about forgiveness, that if we don't forgive, if we're just carrying around all of that, we're really hurting ourselves more than anybody else. And I work with a lot of clients who have a lot of struggles with forgiveness. And particularly lately, it seems like I've had several women clients who are having a hard time forgiving issues that their spouses are going through. So one is, has an addiction that's really hard for her to forgive that addiction and to forgive him for what he's done in the past, even though he is working on it. He's trying really hard to change. It's hard for her to let go and not feel like she's just going to keep getting hurt over and over. And of course, another client who's experienced infidelity with a spouse and really having a hard time forgiving that spouse. Of course, that's a really difficult, painful thing to go through. But we've been working a lot on just how miserable they feel because of all that they're carrying around. So that's why I think, today we might be going through something like that, something big and major like that in our lives, or it might be that we yelled at our kids and we are having a hard time forgiving ourselves for doing that. Or our kids are, one of our children is causing us a lot of stress and pain, and we're maybe blaming them for that and having a hard time forgiving in that way. So I really think that these skills are crucial for all of us. And that's why I'm so grateful to have our guest with us today, who is a true expert, Dr. Robert Enright. Thank you for being here and welcome to Motherhood.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, Christina.
It's so great to have you. And I first want to tell everybody a little bit about you, and then, of course, we're going to pick your brain for a little while on all the insights that you have about forgiveness. But, Robert Enright is a professor of educational psychology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's also a psychologist and a founding board member of the International Forgiveness Institute, Incorporated. He's been pioneering the scientific study of forgiveness and its effects since 1985, and he's really done some incredible work. So listen to this. Time magazine has called him the forgiveness trailblazer. He's the author of over 120 publications, including 7 books, which includes 8 Keys to Forgiveness, which is along the same lines as my 8 Keys to Mental Health Through Exercise, and Forgiveness Therapy. He's also developed and tested a pathway to forgiveness called forgiveness therapy. And I'm new to this, so I'm really excited to learn more about that. And he's helped many people, incest survivors, drug rehabilitation, people in drug rehabilitation, in hospice, shelters for abused women. A lot of different people have been really helped by his work. And he's also recently developed forgiveness education programs for teachers in Northern Ireland, Greece, Africa, Israel, and he's organizing the Jerusalem Conference on Forgiveness for Peace, which is the first of its kind conference. It's a person-to-person forgiveness conference, and it's the first one ever held in the Middle East, and that's coming up in July of 2017. So, wow, you've been busy.
It's been all pure joy, actually, to tell you the truth.
Oh, I love that. Well, and I can see why. What a important topic you've been studying. You've kind of devoted your life work to, really.
Indeed. The past 30 years, I've asked the questions, what is forgiveness? How do people go about it? And we see that it works.
Yeah. So let's start there. What is forgiveness? How do you define forgiveness, or what does it mean to forgive?
Well, we've looked at all kinds of different philosophies, religions, and cultures, and we've come up with the idea that we think cuts across all these different worldviews, and you can really center it on 4 themes. Mm-hmm. When you forgive, you've been treated unjustly. Second, you've been hurt. Third, you respond by getting rid of the negative, like resentment. And fourth, you offer goodness to those who have hurt you. Excuse me.
Bless you. So let's break that up. Break those down for us, those 4 things. I want everybody to really get those in their head. Yes. I love how you describe that.
Well, first of all, let's think of forgiveness as a virtue, like justice and patience and kindness. Mm-hmm. And so it's concerned with the good. And it's really probably what I would call heroic virtue, because it is in the context of being hurt by other people. Mm. When you're hurt by them, you actually do good to them. And that's what's so unusual about it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's true. And I think that's probably what makes it so hard for so many people.
Yes. Yeah. I'm getting over a cold.
Oh, so. Go ahead. I can.
You have to edit that one
out. That's
okay.
I'll edit that one out. No problem.
Okay. Yes, I think it is very hard for many people, primarily because if you think about the virtues, like kindness, it's very easy to be kind to those who are kind to you. But then when you've been hurt by others and they've been unfair to you, the virtues are telling us to go ahead and be kind and gentle and compassionate toward those who are not kind or gentle or compassionate to you. So it almost seems like foolishness for many to get this kind of advice.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so first we have to realize it's a virtue, but it's also unusual in the sense that we're trying to give kindness when we've received something that was probably not so kind.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so it's a struggle.
Yeah.
It takes time.
Yeah.
And it's not like taking the forgiveness pill where you say, I forgive you, and then it's all over. Right. Because we have to deal with the anger within us, the confusion within us, the betrayal in and among people. And that's not easily traversed. And so one has to be patient with the forgiveness process as the person deliberately tries to get rid of the negative or the resentment and offer something positive, at least eventually, not overnight. That last part takes time to grow in us.
Yes, right. To offer something positive. And I appreciate you saying that, because I think a lot of people do feel, I would say a lot of women too, in particular, we can be hard on ourselves when we aren't able to forgive right away. We feel like it's wrong to not forgive maybe sometimes, but we're not ready. So I appreciate you saying, over time, that it doesn't have to happen immediately. That's not always going to be the case, and it doesn't have to be.
You have to give yourself permission to go through the difficulty and the confusion of what the other did to you.
Mm.
When you forgive, you shouldn't expect too much of yourself too soon.
Mm-hmm.
It's not unlike rehabilitating a physical injury. If you severely hurt your knee and it requires surgery, you're not going to be able to get up and run a mile the next day.
Mm-hmm.
It takes time. And it's the same thing with forgiveness. You're doing rehabilitation of the heart.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to understand that. And that takes exercise of the heart. It takes patience. It takes going through some suffering and getting the heart back to where it can trust and love again.
Ooh, okay, this is good. So rehabilitation of the heart. And I appreciate that, because I can understand what you're saying, that when we understand that it's going to take patience, it's going to take hard work, it's going to take some suffering, even as you said, then we can expect that to happen. Then it can hopefully help us through that forgiveness process versus stopping us.
That's right. See, that's why I have actually done scientific studies and dedicated my career to looking at this, because my idea 30 years ago was that this would be helpful, but we didn't know how that would be. We didn't know what people would have to do to forgive. It was somewhat of a mystery, because when you think about it, in terms of families, societies, community groups, we rarely talk about the theme of forgiving. Even those who go to church or synagogue or mosque, if you ask, how many times have you heard about a sermon or a lesson on one person forgiving another? It's rare. And it still isn't as common as I think it ought to be. And so we have a lot of misconceptions about what forgiveness is. And one of the biggest ones is, I ought to do this immediately, or there's something wrong with me. But that's false. And we need to let people have their freedom to go through this with all the bumps and bruises and imperfections that are part of the human condition.
Mm-hmm. Great. So that's one of the first misconceptions, is that we do have to go through it quickly or easily, and that's just not the way it is.
That's not the way it is.
We know that from experience, but it helps to hear you say that from research too, to say that you've actually seen that that's been the case over and over. It's not just one person feeling that way. This is kind of a universal experience for people.
That's right. It's extremely rare for someone to be able to forgive immediately. There are documented cases in published literature, but they're documented because they're unusual. In every one of the cases I have seen and people with whom I have worked, forgiveness is a process that can take weeks, months, or in sometimes years. But that's okay, because even if it takes that long, we begin to see improvements within our own heart as encouragements for us to keep going on the path of forgiveness.
Wow. Yeah, that's so true. So, and you're right. I also appreciate the point that we do hear about those exceptions. I can think of several books of people, so-and-so's family was killed by a drunk driver and they immediately forgave the person. I mean, but that's rare, but we start to think, well, that must be the norm then, because it's a book or it's online or it's in the news or something like that.
The norm is walking a path, a difficult path. And if we know that, it takes some of the pressure off. And we don't need more pressure when we're already burdened by the difficulties of the resentment given to us because of unfair treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some other misconceptions that might get in the way of trying to forgive, or that that people have about what forgiveness even is?
Well, many people say that when they forgive, they will have to excuse what the other person did. So you have to almost play pretend and say, well, it wasn't that bad. Or maybe it wasn't an injustice. Maybe I misunderstood. No, when you forgive, you stand courageously in the truth that what happened to me was bad, it is bad, and it will always be bad. And I am forgiving a person despite that. I am not making up a new story that, oh, maybe I deserved it or maybe it wasn't that bad. Forgiveness stands courageously in the truth that what happened was unjust, and nothing is going to take that away. What changes is my response to it. And another one that's really a big misconception, Christina, is this. I find that people are afraid to forgive because they think they have to reconcile with someone where the situation is unreconcilable. So if I work with people who are in a highly abusive situation, the partner will not stop the abuse. They come up with excuses time after time, and they physically are causing damage. The person who is thinking about forgiveness then says, oh, do I have to go back into that relationship to experience the physical abuse again? No. Forgiving and reconciling are entirely different. To forgive opens the door to reconciliation, but to forgive doesn't necessarily mean you have to reconcile, and here's why. Forgiveness, as we've said, is an internal action of the heart. It's surgery of the heart. It's rehabilitating the heart. And it's what you offer as an individual to another when you're ready. Reconciliation is when two or more people work their way back together again into mutual trust. You can forgive, and the person remains unrepentant, unchanged, entrenched in their issues, and so you can forgive and not reconcile. But why would you want to? What would be the point?
Right.
The point in that case would be, again, to mend your broken heart, because you at least will go through life with a mended heart, if not with that relationship. And what would you rather do? Go through life with a battered heart or with a freed heart? Forgiveness frees that heart. And that's why it's good to forgive, even though you don't necessarily reconcile. And here's another one that I think is really big. People think that when you practice this virtue of forgiveness, you can only practice that one virtue at a time. And they say, well, if I forgive, then I can't seek justice. If my partner is engaging in, let's say, a pornographic addiction, or if I forgive him, then I'll just let him go ahead. No, forgiveness is very tough-minded but tender-hearted. You can forgive someone for past injuries, but ask something of them for future relationship. So you can forgive and say no to the nonsense, to say no to the injustices, but the way you will ask will be qualitatively different if you do this with a forgiving heart, free from the malice, the quest for revenge, or even this harbored resentment. And it's going to come out differently, more patiently, even more compassionately, but still tough-minded.
Ooh, wow. That's great. I mean, you really got to the core of it. I think all those three things you just listed at the end, they all kind of go together, don't they?
Indeed, together.
Yeah.
And if we don't understand those, we run from forgiveness that literally could save our lives.
Right. And I think that's what I was kind of getting at earlier, is so many people who don't want to, or they want to forgive, but they feel like they can't because of these things that you're talking about.
Exactly.
Because they have to give in or let it happen again.
Yes, I'm letting them off the hook if I forgive.
Yeah.
I can't let them off the hook. That would be unfair.
Yeah.
Therefore, I must stay bound tightly with unforgiveness. I must stay with the resentment, even if it kills me. And sadly, when we live with resentment, it can turn on us like a viper and poison us, those who are living with the resentment. And so we have all the injustice that poured into us in the first place to make us resentful, and the resentment. And forgiveness gets rid of that second wave of injustice, the resentment that could truly bring us down.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so good. And I loved what you said about how forgiveness is tough-minded and soft-hearted.
Yes.
Because I think that's where people really get confused too, is just that you, like, and the point of saying that they feel like they can only do one virtue at a time, but that's not the case. You can have forgiveness and justice.
You should.
Yes.
In fact, as you begin forgiveness, bring justice alongside.
Yes.
Forgiveness and justice are great partners. They grow up well together. And as long as we realize that, then our lives will be more complete, and maybe our relationships will as well.
Yeah, wow. So important. So these are all reasons why people get stuck when it comes to forgiveness and have a hard time with it. So how do we start to overcome these things? I mean, obviously, I think hearing you say these things and for us to understand these are normal parts of forgiveness, these are the misconceptions. This is, some of these things feel hard when you're trying to forgive, and that's normal. That's part of it, obviously. But where do we begin? I mean, if someone's listening right now thinking, oh, I've been really harmed by somebody or hurt by somebody that I really cared about, and I can't get over it, where do we begin?
Okay, hold on for just a second.
Sure, go ahead. Got it.
Okay.
I'll get that one out too.
Okay. We begin first by acknowledging our pain. We begin by seeing that the pain itself can be what brings us down. It could bring our children down. It could bring our families down. It's the motivator. And so when I do forgiveness therapy with clients, I first of all, before we even examine the pain, ask them to get in touch with one loving encounter they have had with someone, not necessarily the one who was unjust. Someone that could have even been your mother when you were 6 years old. To get in touch with a sense of a loving virtue first. To, in essence, be bathed in that so that the client understands that they are loved and they know how to love. That's a protection for them. Because see, as they go through forgiveness therapy, they're going to go through some bumps and bruises. So we have identified that there's pain, but then we back off a bit from that. And we tell the true story of a loving incident that's a protection for the person as they begin the session. And we draw on that from time to time. And we say, okay, now let's go to the hard stuff. Let us go to the person who has hurt you, wounded your heart, and we know your heart has been wounded in certain ways. Maybe you're angry. Maybe you're tired. Fatigue is probably the most common symptom I see. Maybe you're comparing yourself with the other, which makes you fume all the more. I hear oftentimes, this guy is perfect at parties. People love him, but they don't understand what goes on behind the closed door. And it's ripping my heart out because everyone tells me to get over it and how wonderful he is. And yes, he has good qualities, but he's wounding me and wounding me. And so with this kind of pain, we then ask, what have you done to heal regarding the pain? And sadly, I find when people have been really brutalized by life, let's say there is that affair, or there's this continued pornography, or physical beating, the person is so beaten down by that most psychotherapies aren't effective. We have worked, for example, with incest survivors, as you've mentioned, and when they came to forgiveness therapy, they've been trying to heal for 40 years, 40 years, and they don't necessarily feel relief. So we ask, would you like to try something new if you've tried everything under the sun? And because of the motivation from the pain, the answer oftentimes is yes. So we say, well, here is something you could choose, but it's up to you because it's your choice. It's up to your own free will whether you want to go down a path of trying to forgive the person. The immediate reaction oftentimes is, what? No, I can't forgive because they have the misunderstanding. They think they'll excuse or automatically reconcile or throw justice under the bus. Right. We say, no, you're going to be knowing you've been treated unfairly and not ever back off from that. You will acknowledge your hurt, and then importantly, you will be struggling to get rid of the negative tendencies in you toward keeping resentment. And paradoxically, here's where forgiveness gets to seem outrageous, offering goodness to the one who hurt you. Do you want to do it? oftentimes people will say, I'll give it a try, but I don't think it'll work.
Mm-hmm.
Give it a try, but in the end, I don't think I'll really forgive. And the answer we usually give is, okay, at least let's give it a try and see. Then we move into what we call the work phase of forgiveness. Do you want me to start explaining some of that, or do you
Let me ask a couple questions first, because I want to make sure our listeners are getting all this. And I have a couple questions myself. So first of all, you're saying we need to get in touch with the pain, which I think a lot of people probably know that on some level, that we have to get in touch with that hurt, and you're going to have to go there. And like you said before, it's going to be uncomfortable, and it's going to be difficult and challenging probably to go there and have to feel that and have to deal with that. But we know that that's the way we heal. Now, but what you said also is really important, is about how you help people get in touch with those loving moments first, to remind yourself that you are worthy of love and capable of love, and you've experienced that before, and you can have that again, right? So you're not just this bitter person that you might feel like when you're having a hard time with your forgiveness, right?
Exactly. And when it's the hard road of forgiving, we can stop and get in touch with the loving relationship again, where you feel more whole, more protected, where you're not out there with your pain. And so this notion of loving and being loved is what it's all about.
Yeah.
It's what you're moving toward when you're going to forgive anyway, where you realize the other can be loved on a certain level. And I, indeed, can be loved. And people forget that when they've been beaten down.
That's so important, and what a great way to start off. And then I'm intrigued by your developing this forgiveness therapy. So obviously through your research, you must have noticed a need. Like you said, there were so many people, obviously, that you've come across who were trying different forms of therapy and not being able to heal and forgive. And so I'm guessing that's what drove you to create this forgiveness therapy. But I guess I want to, before we talk about the work of it and the main part of what we can do too, I'm curious to know just what were you trying, how did you set out to make this different? What, in what way is this kind of therapy, obviously it's geared toward forgiveness, but what based on your research did you notice needed to be different about the therapy?
We noticed when we looked at the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the Psychiatric Association, deep anger was not given enough emphasis. There were occasionally you will see diagnoses that focus on anger, but oftentimes it's anxiety, depression, and related kind of emotions or characteristics, okay? And so realize that when people are being treated unfairly, it's so often the case that people end up catching this deep anger, this toxic anger, this poisonous anger that we call resentment. But there was not enough emphasis in any of the psychotherapeutic communities for over 100 years. We thought, well, could it be possible, just possible, that learning to forgive might be an antidote to poisonous anger? Because what you're doing is you're transcending the anger with compassion. And as compassion grows in your heart, the anger ought to diminish. And so it's really going after this deep, profound, and profoundly ignored anger in the human condition that was not given enough at all emphasis in either the clinical psychology or psychiatric communities. And that was the impetus for this.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I went through an experience myself several years ago, and I had a lot of anger. We inherited our two nephews after my sister and brother-in-law both died, and we were trying to adopt them. And their grandparents on the other side were trying to take us to court to prevent us from adopting them, and causing a lot of pain and heartache. And, we had to be subjected to, parenting evaluations. Are we fit parents? And are we doing a good job? And it just was so hard, because not only were we trying to heal our family from these major losses, but then we were being attacked for what we felt like was a good thing. So it was really a hard time, but I had so much anger and I just kept pushing it down because I felt so bad about having the anger. And
Yes.
eventually that's where my therapy got to, was we had to deal with the anger, and I had to realize that it's an emotion like all the others, and I was fine to cry or be sad, or but I turned that anger into some kind of self hatred or self, abuse or punishment. Do you find that people do that with the anger because we just don't know what to do with it or how to handle it? Yeah.
All the time.
So that's
And
normal.
it's normal, and I wish it weren't the case. And if I
Yeah.
were powerful enough to change that about the human condition, I would.
Yeah.
But what I find is when people are treated unjustly by others, the one they tend to turn on the most is the self.
Yeah.
That's a double blow, and it's not fair. But see, once you get an insight that you're angry, most therapies aren't going to tell you what to do with the anger.
Yeah.
See, insight therapy will say, okay, we've done the work. We know what's happening. You've been repressing your anger. You're no longer repressing it. Go in peace. Well, no, because it's not so easy to say, okay, I know I'm angry, but now you can't just so easily get rid of it. You have to do certain kind of work. And forgiveness, we have found, is a hugely powerful kind of work that not just diminishes the anger, but gets it below clinical levels, manageable levels, and can even be eliminated in some cases. And even if it's not, it is then manageable where you can get on with life well.
Wow. Okay, then I want to hear about the work of it. I'm
Okay,
intrigued. I want to know how you do this.
okay, here's the work of it.
Okay.
Once you have been given permission to be angry,
Mhm.
once you know you are loved and can love, once you know you have inner work to do and you are motivated and know what forgiveness is and is not, we now start with thinking not about yourself, but about the other, about the one who hurt you. That's where forgiveness therapy fundamentally differs from all other therapy.
Mhm.
When someone comes in with anxiety in traditional therapy, we look at the person, the client, and their anger and their anxiety and their depression. With forgiveness therapy, you start by looking at the other and their story and who they are in a broader sense than the injustices against you.
Mhm.
And we start with this.
That's
What do you
important.
know about the person's childhood?
Mhm.
What's tough in the person's childhood? Were they wounded? Were they treated unjustly? Where? Do you see a vulnerable person? Do you see them crying in childhood? Do you see someone whose heart might have been broken in childhood? What about adolescence? What's the story of their adolescence? Did they have trouble with peer groups, with navigating very clumsily romantic relationships when they're very, very new at it?
Mhm.
Were they bullied? Did they have trouble with mother and father when they were individuating and leaving home? Where were they wounded? Where were they slammed down? Where are they vulnerable? Where were they crying out in pain? Early adulthood, same kind of deal. And what we try to do with what we call the personal perspective is to see a human being who has been wounded, who has been treated unfairly, and carries excess baggage into the relationship with you. Not to excuse, not to automatically reconcile, not to throw justice under the bus, but to expand your story and see who this person is. We call it the personal perspective.
Wow.
Now,
So powerful. That's so powerful. And I think that, I mean, from personal experience, honestly, I think that's how I was able to forgive these grandparents, was to be able to, I had to continually kind of step outside myself and sort of look back at them and say, well, they're missing their son and they're missing their grandkids and they're feeling afraid and they're, and keep reminding myself. And especially I think when we go through things where you're going through situations where you can't necessarily change the situation too much and you're going to keep experiencing that, like with family members where maybe you have a parent that's been just isn't a good parent to you or isn't a good mother or father to you, but you love them and you want to keep a relationship, but you feel wounded over and over throughout your life, and it becomes this kind of continual forgiveness process.
It's a continual forgiveness process that gets easier with deeper results. But the basic point of the personal perspective is to see a wounded human being, because it's true, who is wounded. Then we go to a global perspective. And by that I mean we bring it up a notch in terms of abstraction, where we see a common humanity. We both need a little air to breathe in this world. We need a little plot of land to stand on. We're both mortal. We're subjected to sickness, and we both will die someday. We share that. There's a common humanity, and all human beings, if you think about it, are special, unique, and irreplaceable. Your DNA is unique in this world. When you're gone, there will never be anyone like you. So when you combine our shared humanity with all of the wounds you also share, we begin to see someone who is not evil incarnate, but someone who is a fallible human being who did wrong, and we will never get rid of that statement. But it's someone who's done wrong in a much larger context, where I'm not defining them only by what they've done to me. Then comes what we call, the philosopher Keith Yandell taught me this one, the cosmic perspective. It depends on your religion. It depends on your faith base. And you can do this as an atheist or an agnostic, but most people with whom I work have a belief system of some kind, because most in the United States do. And so if someone is part of the Abrahamic traditions, let's say Judaism or Christianity or Islam, we ask a question such as this: is that person made in the image and likeness of God? Are you made in the image and likeness of God? And if so, what does that mean for how you are to respond to that person, even if they don't respond to you the way you had hoped? And when you put the personal, global, and cosmic perspectives together, you are seeing the woundedness that that person suffered from childhood, your common humanity, and you share something where you are both loved, perhaps, by the transcendent being. And then the question is, who is the person who hurt you? And when they start telling a broader story, we move from the thinking to the feeling, and we focus on the heart, and even a tiny little bit, an inch, if you will, of compassion or softness of heart can eventually begin to grow for that person, not because of what they've done, but in spite of it. And that compassion needs to be acknowledged. You have to see what an amazing person you are for even allowing yourself to have compassion for this person. And so we ask, who are you as the wounded? And the person often says, I'm pretty good. How about who hurt you? They can be pretty good too. Then leads to the next point of what we call bearing the pain. And see, it's easier to bear the pain when you realize how strong you are by offering compassion. And when we say bear the pain, what we mean is that you will stand with the pain and paradoxically not try to get rid of it right now, but to stand with it, acknowledge it, accept it, and in your pain, offer the virtue of forgiveness, which is compassion, toward the one who, in terms of justice, doesn't deserve it. They might because of their humanity, but they don't deserve it because of what they've done to you. And as you can stand with that pain and offer a little bit of softness of heart, you begin to realize that they are more than what they've done. You are more than your pain, and that we're dealing humanity to humanity. Which then leads to our last point of the work. Can you exercise forgiveness in its fullest sense now that you realize you're a strong person, a loved person, who can give love? Can you give something of that to the one who has hurt you? And by then they're strong enough to say, yes, it might be a returned email. It might be a smile. It doesn't have to be back into a partnering relationship if the other is unrepentant, unchanged, and dangerous. It doesn't mean going back into the original role you had with that person. It means offering something of what you can realistically while keeping yourself safe. And it's that when you put that all together, the cognitive perspectives of the personal, the global, and the cosmic, offering a little tiny bit of a softened heart, standing in the pain without trying to get rid of it, and then offering goodness, the great paradox of forgiveness as you begin to heal, in rather startling ways. And we can talk about the research on that in a moment, but let's see what kind of reaction you have.
Well, my reaction is wow. I can see why this works because so many techniques for dealing with pain start with going into the pain.
Yes.
And people aren't ready for that. And that's what scares us. And we want to close up and we don't know how to do that. Because I'm a big believer in feeling the pain too. I say freely experience emotion with love, feel it. We have to feel it. But what you've done here is outline a method for us all that we can all take from, and obviously that you use successfully in therapy to prepare us to be able to feel that, to see the bigger picture and to understand. I read a book years ago. It was a Christian type book called The Peace Giver. And one of the things that stood out in it was this metaphor of, in the book, a husband and wife were fighting and they were really just having a hard time forgiving each other for the things that they'd said and done. And they compared it to breaking your arm or hurting your arm, and how, what we want to do is punish the thing that hurts us. My arm hurts. I want to hurt it back. I want to punish it back. But instead, we need to stop and nurture and love and sort of, bear the pain, like you say, but in a loving way, and realize that really our arm is part of us, and that other person is in some way, shape, or form part of us as well. So I love that cosmic and that, that bigger picture perspective that we are kind of all one in a sense too. And we can relate to the other people in that way, but also realize that when we want to hurt other people or not forgive, we really are only hurting ourselves, just like if we were hurting our own arm.
That's right. If we do not forgive, we might go on a good jogging program, and it could help, or read a good book, and it could help.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it doesn't get rid of the pain.
Right.
But stand in the pain and offer that goodness, knowing who you are and who the other is, your heart becomes softer and softer, so there's not as much room for the resentment as was early on, because it's being filled with compassion. It's being filled with goodness of this virtue that probably wasn't even on the radar of the person before they began discussing it with us about what forgiveness really is. So you fill up the heart with passion that heals you, and it may or may not heal the other.
Right.
Because sometimes we offer all the goodness in the world. They say, give me more now, go serve me, and I'm going to take everything I can from you till there's nothing left of you.
Right.
Well, I'm not going to put up with that, because that's a justice issue. But at the very least, we can offer that compassion and keep that compassion in our heart as a protection against the corrosive nature of resentment. And we are healed, and we're giving the relationship an opportunity to be healed, but that's up to the other person as well.
Right, and that's our only responsibility, really, is to heal ourselves, or to allow ourselves to be healed, and then to offer that to the other person. That's it.
Some people want to throw the love away. That's tragic.
Yeah.
But at least we're not being thrown away with their decision.
Right.
And forgiveness can literally give us our lives back, and can be the conduit for getting the relationship back if the other realizes what an important thing you just did for him or her.
Wow. So you mentioned just a moment ago about the research, and just in our last few minutes here, maybe you could share a little bit about what you've learned about what this process can do for people.
Sure. Well, let's take a look, since we mentioned it earlier, the research with incest survivors.
Yeah.
And that was done by Suzanne Friedman, and she and I did this here at the University of Wisconsin. She's now a tenured professor at the University of Northern Iowa. She took 12 very courageous women who had experienced this horror, and she randomly assigned them to go on a forgiveness process with her once a week for 1 hour, or to wait until their counterpart, each one had a counterpart, there were 6 people in each group, finished forgiveness therapy. And they went through it just in this way. They were aware of their pain. They were allowed to be angry. They were given permission. They understood what forgiveness was. They went through the personal, global, and cosmic perspectives. They had looked at compassion if it emerged, bore the pain, and they gave the gift of some kind. One woman who's Jewish, for example, gave the gift to her deceased father of going to the cemetery with her two sons, having a tasteful religious ceremony of respect for the dead, and basically posthumously was giving him a good name in the family, not because of what he'd done, but because he had a lot of other good things that he had done. At the end of the wave of forgiveness therapy with the first 6, one-on-one for an hour a week, it took 14 months. It's a long time.
Wow, yeah.
Remember, some of them were harboring this resentment for 40 years.
Yeah, right. Wow.
It's that long. Dan and I then compared the two groups, those that had forgiveness therapy for approximately over a year, and those who still were waiting, free to do therapy as they wish in other venues. And what we found, surprisingly, is that all of the incest survivors who had forgiveness therapy and were clinically depressed, which makes sense, ended up being non-depressed. The depression didn't just go down, it ended. Their anxiety was statistically different than the control group, those who didn't have therapy yet. And those who had forgiveness therapy ended up forgiving to a degree. They weren't perfect forgivers, and this is another important insight. We have a forgiveness scale from high to low. They started very low forgiveness toward the man who perpetrated this. They went only to the middle of the scale. In other words, they weren't perfect forgivers. They still had anger left over. They still had some confusion. But as one incest survivor said, I used to be controlled by my anger. My anger is now being controlled by me. I'm the one in control. We then started forgiveness therapy with the control group, 1 hour a week. It took them about 14 months. They too ended up going from clinical depression to no depression. And then we reassessed the first group, who were now 14 months without forgiveness therapy. They were still non-depressed.
Wow.
So it showed that these courageous women, all of whom said, I will not forgive at first, they thought it was too hard. They ended up forgiving by the pathway you and I have been talking about today, and they got their lives back. Their anxiety went down. Their depression left. And you know who they ended up liking? Themselves.
Yes.
Self-esteem rose, again, because they said, I can stand in the pain. Look what I can do. I can offer a compassion through a broken heart. And I can be a giver who can give to someone who isn't giving to me. Who am I as a person? They truly got their lives back. One woman, for example, was so depressed she couldn't take her dream job away from Madison, went through the forgiveness therapy, got rid of her depression, her fatigue went down, she took her dream job.
Wow.
Her life back and her dream job.
Wow.
Did that for her.
That's pretty impressive. That's pretty amazing. And I can see why that works so well, that, you're trying to help people forgive, but in the process of forgiving, we actually, like you say, we literally heal ourselves. And that's what the research is showing. I mean, absolutely. You're healing yourself and loving yourself.
That's right. We rediscover the truth of who we are as persons. We are capable of loving again. And what I think is so important about that is you can now give that love to your children much more abundantly than might have been the case when you're racked with the pain of resentment. It not only heals the resentment, it allows you to be a giver to your own children so they can have their lives as well. Otherwise, you know what their legacy could be if we simply wallow in what has happened to us? We give them the legacy of the resentment. You know what they might do? Give that legacy of resentment to their children. Mentioned I work in Belfast, Northern Ireland in forgiveness education. I've been doing it for 14 years. There's an anger there that's very high. You know when the anger started in Belfast? Around 1520.
Wow.
It's been going on for hundreds of years, and sadly, too much anger is passed down through the generations. Forgiveness helps us break that cycle in the family, and we become conduits of good rather than conduits of anger.
Oh, perfect way to wrap up. I mean, I could talk to you about this all day. There's so much to learn here. But I think we all want to become a conduit of good and not a conduit of anger, especially as mothers and all of us listening. That's really important. So I really appreciate all of your insights and wisdom today and your research and all the books that you've written. So people can find you at internationalforgiveness.com, correct?
Correct.
And find out more about which of your books do you recommend for someone who's thinking, oh, I want to try this therapy, or I want to read more about it for myself, or look into it?
I would urge the Norton book, 8 Keys to Forgiveness.
Yeah.
Like your 8 keys in the exercise realm.
Mm-hmm.
And because we also have a chapter there on self-forgiveness, and you had mentioned earlier in the program. And it's very similar. But I urge people to forgive another person first before someone forgives themselves. You know why?
Why?
Find that it's the hardest to forgive the self. So forgive someone else first, become forgivingly fit, then apply it to yourself. And one of the 8 keys is self-forgiveness. And people should consider that applying that to themselves if they have, through their pain, offended others and themselves.
Right. Well, I think I'll have to have you back then to talk about self-forgiveness. But I think today what you said, like you say, it can be applied. And what you know, your point in the research at the end was that these women also learned to love themselves. So I'm guessing forgive themselves for a lot of things too, through the process of forgiving others.
And self-forgiveness is reestablishing the truth of that I am a person who is loved, capable of love, and why don't I then apply that to myself?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Well, thank you so much. So everybody go check out internationalforgiveness.com, Dr. Robert Enright. And thank you so much for being here, Dr. Enright. It's been a pleasure having you here.
It's my honor, Christina. You take care, and all your listeners and viewers as well.
Thank you so much. And for everybody out there, I hope you'll tune in next week to Motherhood Radio and continue to grow through motherhood with me. And we'll see you next time, everybody. Bye-bye. All right.